Alright class, Quarter Century Stampede put us in a peculiar spot. Like I talked about it in my last video addressing Quarter Century Stampede, it gave amazing reprints to cards like Fiendsmith Engraver in Molchummy Farmless, but then it made some other cards indirectly more expensive. Like the rest of the Fiendsmith cards. Yeah, that was dumb. But no worries, class. Today we're going to be focusing on the good, and I'm going to be talking about 5 budget Yu-Gi-Oh decks that can be built for $50. It's actually pretty cool, as there are some new Yu-Gi-Oh strategies because of Stampede that are now affordable, and also because of the Yu-Gi-Oh meta shifting, there are some other strategies that are also just as powerful. In today's video, class, I'm going to be breaking down those particular decks, but that doesn't absolve you from your homework. You're going to also need to post down below in the comment section what are some $50 decks that you think are going to be powerful, and also what do you think of these 5 for a new player coming into the game or somebody that just doesn't want to spend all of the money. Let's go ahead and jump on in. What's going on with y'all, big dogs? And it is an amazing day for Yu-Gi-Oh! I hope that your day, phenomenal. But if it isn't, don't let what happened at the beginning of your day ruin the rest of your day. So class, you already know it's the best part of the week. It's Update Monday! A particular time where I trick you guys into thinking that this is a Yu-Gi-Oh video, when in actuality, I want to make you a better person overall. But if you don't want to be a better person, we do have timestamps. You can just skip to Yu-Gi-Oh. In today's Update Monday, I actually want to talk about something that a student taught me. In this particular situation, I was talking about this student, and this particular individual is incredibly intelligent. I mean, this particular student is mentally and emotionally more intelligent than most adults that I've ever came across. It takes a special type of person to be able to diagnose not only a situation, but someone's emotional intelligence at that time. But then I started to notice that this same student couldn't diagnose their own problems and solve them. And it's not that person's fault at all. In fact, it's actually really good that I taught her that, because now she might take over the world. But one of the biggest things to improve yourself that we must do is look at the man in the mirror. Michael Jackson said it best. Ow! The hardest thing that you can do is not only look at yourself, identify your flaws, but more importantly, moving on to correct them. And they don't have to be the biggest things in the world. We ain't gotta go super deep, right? They can be incredibly small. Like, for example, I am terrible at watching my macros. And my biggest flaw is that I put the onus of that onto my wife, which is not necessarily a fair thing. If I wanna get in shape and if I wanna look better, I have to do the stuff myself. But one thing you Slifer slackers are not going to have to look further for are budget Yu-Gi-Oh decks. I comprised a list of 5 really strong budget Yu-Gi-Oh decks whose entire core can be purchased for under $50. Some of them have been influenced by Quarter Century Stampede, while the others are just really good decks at the time. One of the core ethos for this Yu-Gi-Oh channel is to help balance the scales for the budget player, the guy that can't necessarily afford the most expensive things, but still wants to enjoy this game. So when I say that I've done the research in that Blue Eyes is a very cheap Yu-Gi-Oh deck that can be really successful, you should really take my word for it. In fact, there's actually been a few Blue Eyes White Dragons that have topped regional events without the usage of the Primite cards or Dominus Purge. Of course, those 2 cards make your Blue Eyes strategy a lot stronger, but it's something to look forward to, especially with those cards being reprinted in the very near future. Another thing that I want to point out about the pure budget version of Blue Eyes is that they actually figured out a card that was been really useful. Azurai's Silver Dragon was from the old Blue Eye structure deck and wasn't really used competitively until now. Players soon realized that not only does Azurai's protect your dragon monsters from threats like Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence, and just anything in between, it also allows you to be able to special summon Blue Eyes White Dragon to your side of the field, which will trigger the effect of Maiden of White for a free synchro play. And considering that Blue Eyes is already decently strong, this card is really good against strategies like Malice and Ryziel, who want to be able to destroy or banish as many cards as possible through their play lines of Ryziel Detonator or MTP-07. Azurai's Silver Dragon provides another wrinkle into the deck that wasn't discovered until budget players figured it out, but a card that was really expensive that now will probably be accessed for more budget players is going to be Dragon Master Magia. Dragon Master Magula was unfairly $1,000, but thanks to Quarter Century Stampede, it's around 40-esque, which pretty much means that you're not going to be getting it in your initial build. But now that it's so much cheaper, it's actually a card that budget players can afford to use when you combine it with cards like Magician's Soul and Illusion of Chaos. Because the deck plays so many spell and trap cards, Magician's Souls is a free draw too, and Illusion of Chaos just so happens to be the chaos requirement to be able to make Dragon Master Magia. It also helps that Magician's Souls is a level 1 spellcaster, so it can be used for the Link 1 play when needed. Now again, this particular version of Blue Eyes would be a little bit more expensive than $50, but the baseline card that you need will be under that $50. I actually love that Quarter Century Stampede made Dragon Master Magia accessible to a lot more players, just like how it made decks like Memento a lot cheaper too. Now, it's pretty unfortunate that Memento TheCaliEffect Combined Creation skyrocketed in price because of Pascal winning the YCS, but I think that that's multiple good things at once. It pretty much confirms that Memento is a very competitive Yu-Gi-Oh deck. It can battle with the best of them and win. And the cool thing about it is that inside of Quarter Century Stampede, both Memento Bone Party and Anjuwich got a very much needed reprint. These two cards were previously the most expensive cards in the deck, and saying that you needed 3 copies of each, it easily conflated Memento from a $50 deck that it is now, all the way to $120+. So yeah, I think the trade-off of only needing 1 TheCaliEffect as opposed to needing 3 Bone Party and 3 Anjuwich is a very fair one. Especially considering that since half of the reprints are in Stampede, we're going to be getting another rarity collection set without the Quarter Centuries that will have the rest of the Mementos. I promise you, I know how Konami works. They want your money. I think the Memento Goblin version is still pretty strong, but if players start playing less Rizio, it won't be as impactful as other variants. There's the Fiendsmith variant, which only needs 1 Fiendsmith engraver and not really the other cards. Then there's also the hand trap version, or a board breaker approach, which takes advantage of super polymerization, a card that's really good against the Blue Eyes meta that we're expected to be going against. Now, in case you're salivating at the mouth and wondering where exactly could you get personal deck lists, you should already know I'm going to be putting them on my Patreon as a special thank you for helping me pay my editors. But that brings us to another powerful Yu-Gi-Oh deck that takes advantage of Quarter Century Stampede. Vanquish Soul is the other Yu-Gi-Oh strategy that was printed in Quarter Century Stampede. You see, normally in these Quarter Century sets, at least 2 Yu-Gi-Oh archetypes main cards are reprinted and then followed up in the next rarity collection set. The rest of the cards will then subsequently be printed. Vanquish Soul was decently expensive, not because it was a really strong strategy, but simply because it was incredibly hard to get. If you missed your opportunity in Wild Survivors, then you could get your opportunity at the 25th anniversary dueling tins, but even those were starting to dry up. Having another opportunity with Quarter Century Stampede, while the cards are still relatively cheap, and right before the new support is announced, will give you a prime opportunity to pick up a Yu-Gi-Oh strategy that will only get stronger. And that brings me to my point. I don't think that Vanquish Soul is a top tier Yu-Gi-Oh strategy right now. Of course, it has its flaws with not being a very easy to search Yu-Gi-Oh deck, and also requiring a big brain to be able to pilot. But what Vanquish Soul makes up for is that it is actually a really fun Yu-Gi-Oh deck with tons of potential in the right metas. You see, players are going to start picking up cards like Retaliating Sea, because not only is it good against decks that use spell cards to be able to special summon like Memento, it's also good against the Dragon Tail strategy that's coming out in the future. It also just so happens to be an Earth monster for Vanquish Soul to use, but Bestial monsters are still going to be good against Blue Eyes. Board breaker cards like Divine Kara Kirakara and Dalgorin the Mad Flame Kaiju are also strong Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and all of those cards just so happen to be the perfect attribute for Vanquish Soul players, making it a really powerful deck to be able to play. Now, Stampede did give some really interesting free agent reprints. I think cards like Destructive Daruma Cannon will well do. It was a card that I told you guys to buy before it skyrocketed in price when it was less than $1, and then rose to over $8 a copy. It is a really good card. Being able to Book of Moon all monsters on the field and then send any Link monster or any monster unaffected to the graveyard is almost a game-winning effect under most circumstances. Then there's also Transaction Rollback. This card has been reprinted before, but having it reprinted as a super, ultra, secret, prismatic collector's rare and everything else in between is a blessing in disguise. And overall, that would have made a deck like Labyrinth cheap, but it misses the mark because of its recent topping in YCS Houston, making Arius the Labyrinth Butler really expensive. But there is another really good trap-based Yu-Gi-Oh deck that you should consider. Dinomorphia!
Go, go, Dinomorphia! Do, 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 do.
Only the real ones know. You guys wouldn't understand. I've seen multiple variants of Dinomorphia, a version that can use Destructive Daruma Cannon to be able to flip everything face down when it's most convenient, and then use Transaction Rollback to copy your Dinomorphia trap cards to continue to fusion summon. And I've also seen Dinomorphia decks use Wannabe to get access to as many trap cards as possible and being able to get some really good effects. I personally still like the standard version because it empowers you to use cards like Solemn Judgment and Solemn Strike to stymie your opponent's big plays while paying a ton of life points. Dinomorphia loves playing life points, and as old as it is, I'm still trying to get to that 69 420 life points to be able to be the ultimate Dinomorphia player. I think that Dinomorphia has a ton going for it, and it is a genuine, really cheap Yu-Gi-Oh deck. In fact, you can probably build the entire deck for $50. Me and TJ are going to do a duel challenge with only $50, and we're going to have to fight over who gets to play this deck. And lastly, I'm going to put a little bit of copium in it, but I still think that Sword Soul is one of those amazing Yu-Gi-Oh decks. Genuinely, Sword Soul is one of those secret $50 Yu-Gi-Oh decks that can actually do something. But that's probably just my bias on Sword Soul. The real number 5 has to go to Melodious. Now, Melodious hasn't really done much as of recent, but considering that most of the Melodious cards are common, it's incredibly cheap. Big dogs, the most expensive card for Melodious is Soprano the Melodious Songstress, and it's only $2. So it pretty much lets you know what you're getting into with this deck. With Dimension Shifter finally being limited and almost obsolete, I think cards like Schuberto the Melodious Maestra might actually be a lot more impactful. I mean, it is essentially a Malice white binder without it being a Malice monster. And then the deck has some really cool combos where it can put your opponent in some situational locks that they may not be expecting. I think the combo with Sonata and Area the Melodious Divas needs to be studied. It reminds me of back in my day with the Marauding Captain lock. You'd summon multiple copies of Marauding Captain and your opponent can't attack you, except this time around it's a little bit modernized. Preventing your cards from not being able to be destroyed by card effects, battle, or targeted is incredibly strong. And the best thing about Melodious is that it can be an engine. I've seen strategies like Melodious Voiceless Voice or even Melodious Branded. Two other strategies that are decently cheap, but just don't make the cut because there are certain cards that you may need that are a little bit expensive. Except for maybe Branded. Wait, Branded might actually fit the criteria. I might have to do some research. Actually, that's your research, guys. I told you guys at the beginning of the video that you guys are going to let us know about some deck cores that you can get for under $50. And I think I just may have dropped the ball in giving you 3 by accident. But go ahead and let the entire class know about some really cheap Yu-Gi-Oh decks that players can be using, whether they're getting back into the game, just getting into the game, or just want a cheap, quick fix because of Quarter Century Stampede. Until then, you can go ahead and check out these videos so I can catch you on the next one. Make it to the next class, you Slifer slackers. And remember, you're important. You just got to do that evaluation of yourself.